Okay, tonight I want to pick up in a place with Gideon tonight. We started a little bit. We talked about Sisera, jail, the hammer, the spike, okay, and all of that, some last week. But I want to jump down a little bit further into Gideon, okay? And Gideon is one of those examples that we like to go to. There's a lot of good there. A lot of good examples for us there. We see God walking with Gideon, if you will. And so, that's, I think, encouraging to us. And it was encouraging to him. And we see that really that's one of the main I think, things emphasized during that. So let's go through here. Tonight we're going to do our best to knock off what's in 6:12 there. But we are backing up slightly tonight. Two of the things that are really interesting in this whole entire book of Judges, one is that they left God out of their situation there, and they kind of did whatever they wanted to in their own, what was right in their own eyes. And we kind of see that somewhat today. We all may fall into that trap once in a while to do what's right in our own eyes, but we see the result of that. And it became a cycle with Israel as they first had taken over all the lands that had been given to them. So they really never got totally settled, did they? And they always went through this cycle of disruption. Tonight is that. So we're going to try to cover these kings here for the most part. I mean, judges. Some of them are just the one verse or two verses, okay? So we're going to cover them mostly tonight. And then next week, I'm going to cover this immorality. It kind of demonstrates what's happened when, after the judges have done their thing, how did the tribes act, okay? How did they live, okay, after that? Okay, I want to go past this. We talked about this a little bit last week. The oppressors are Midian and the Amalekites, okay? And we see that Gideon was called, okay, was chosen by an angel to be the judge, which is a little unique in how some of the situations worked out. And that after he was done, they had 40 years of rest. Well, there's some things that happened during that time, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. We kind of covered these, when Gideon first went out to fight, Ephraim complained because they said they didn't invite them, so they end up having to have a battle over that. But I'm going to go through this section. It's something that we all have reviewed fairly often. This is where I want to pick up here in this spot. We have said and talked about up to this point that there was no king in Israel and that everyone did what was right in their own eyes, okay? And so that even becomes a problem, if you will, for Gideon because the people saw Gideon and the result of what Gideon had done, and they wanted him to be king, okay? Wanted him to be a king. And so Gideon, in chapter 8, verse 22, we find I think, kind of an interesting dichotomy or, a difficulty, if you will, in Gideon transitioning from judge to everyday person, okay? And we see what happens here. But in verse 22, let's read this. It says, the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. So what were they meaning by that? Well, I mean, basically, rule over us. How did Gideon take it? Gideon takes it, says, verse 23 says, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. So it appears that Gideon here, okay, is trying to, stave off this problem that Israel wants to create, right? Because it would have been a problem if he had said, "Yeah, I'll be your king. install me, okay? But he didn't do that. He said, God's going to rule over you, not me. And I think that's the good part of Gideon, if you will, the better thinking Gideon that is represented here. And then he goes further than that, though. He begins to have a little problem, didn't he? I think he ended extremely well. Great position. He was positioned well. He made a great statement, the Lord will rule over you. But then he goes on, and this is what he asks. Let me make a request of you. I don't want to be your king, but, right? So there was a but at the end of that. What was the but? I don't want to rule over you. The Lord will rule over you, but let me make this request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil. For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. Okay, so there was a cultural thing here. And there was a lot of heavy earring use in that culture. And they said, okay, I'm willing to do that. And they did. Okay, they spread a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. And it's interesting because let me get out of this thing here. It's a lot of money. Okay, it's a lot. All right. Now it's a lot of gold, and it's interesting to me that he went from the last statement in verse 23 to now asking them to basically give him money. And he did. He took the money. It says, besides the gold that they had in their ears, they also wore this crescent. Have you ever seen some of the things they wore? It was like a crescent, okay, and hung from chains and all, okay? All right, so they wore those too that were made out of gold, and so those also were given. The pendants, purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and all of that, okay, they gave to Gideon. What did Gideon do with it? 27. What did he do? 8:27. What did Gideon do with that? Pardon? Yeah, he makes an ephod. What does that look like? It's just it's sort of a half tunic, isn't it? But usually it was well ornamented, right? I mean, it was richly appointed. And so he makes this ephod out of this, and he put it in his city, in Ophrah. And all Israel whored after it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. And so Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more, and the land had rest for 40 years. But in the end, probably the fame, I mean, I'm just guessing from human character, fame kind of took over there. Excuse me. And so Gideon makes this ephod, and when it says hoard after it, they worshipped it, didn't they? So they used it as an idol, and it became a snare for them. Now, the next, let's see, where am I at here? Got to catch up with my own mouth here. Okay, so also in the last part, let's say verses 28 to 30, okay, it appears that he also had a lot of wives, okay? And so he had a lot of money now, had a lot of wives, and becomes a snare. All of that becomes a snare to him. It seems that Gideon also fell to the temptation to elongate his leadership, if you will, in Israel, because he gets all these wives, he has a bunch of children, he has a whole bunch of offspring, and it kind of seems that he was looking for some kind of hereditary rule, right, to take over. And then the last part of that chapter, as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, who was that? Gideon, right? Another name for Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. Okay. After Gideon, I wanted to show that this next short series of slides do not represent judges. It's not a judge. Okay. Who am I talking about? The son of Gideon, right? Son of Gideon. And so his name was Abimelech. You almost could call him an anti-judge, right? Because when he dies, Israel's in a worse place than he was when he lived. Okay, he did not save them from their oppressors. He engaged more oppression. Right? He was a son of Gideon's slave, concubine, a Canaanite concubine, making him a half Canaanite, if you will. And here's the thing, though. Sometimes the world knows how to affect us more than we know how to affect them, doesn't it? Because Abimelech leverages Canaanite ideas, right? He kind of channels a king, if you will, and the Canaanite, those around him, would then be more apt to see him as a leader if the more king-like he was treated, right? And also then Israelites' desire for a king, which we know when this ends, during Samuel's time, they ask for a king, don't they? So all of this, allowing all of these nations to still exist, allowing and seeing here that they were so easily, if you will, enticed to be to get a king, to eliminate God, if you will, in any way that they could, anyway. So instead of making something good or godly, Abimelech did the opposite. Okay, and his activity, his actions, become more of a snare, if you will, than it was saving them from anything. Okay. Abimelech then tries to force by his own force, if you will, his own will, to become a judge over Israel by force, and we know that one of the keys of the local areas around them was worshiping Baal, and so he seeks to set himself up like a king, and he uses Baal in the center of his move, if you will, to do that. And Abimelech initiates his coup, and he funds it through profits from that pagan worship, okay, in Shechem. He makes a deal with the men in Shechem, okay, and we see Abimelech is headed for a downfall here. Okay? In chapter 9 and verse 23, we see that while Abimelech had made a deal with Shechem to make him this king-like person, God gets involved. He stirs up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, so that the citizens of Shechem did something that was, let's say, underhanded. This is acted treacherously, but underhanded, if you will, and did not agree, did not follow the agreement that they had made. So why did all of that happen? Okay, why? Why did God do this? Why did Abimelech, be able to advance himself in this way? And what's going to happen to him because of this? The picture there kind of gives you an idea. Remember how Abimelech dies? A woman threw a stone out of a window and killed him. Now, we see that in several of these situations where Israel is able to be victorious, or God's punishment is exacted on someone, he uses a woman in delivering that to them. And so we see in verse 24 of 9 that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, which is the 70 sons are the sons that Abimelech had killed when he tried to take over. Okay, and so now you see the result of that. The violence that was done to them, and their blood was laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. And then the men of Shechem, they ambushed people in the mountains, they robbed those who passed by, and so on. Okay, and so they go to fight. Right, they're going to have a battle, if you will, with them. I think that this next thought is maybe a thought idea for us today. We seem to be desperate for a king. They were definitely desperate to have someone lead them. And yet, at the same time, they had a king and God, but they did not want to follow him. And so we look around and we kind of sometimes we like to be like what we see in the world. We like to organize ourselves like we see in the world. We may approach things like we see them approaching them in the world. But we see the result of that in this case, because Abimelech thought he would do that and did try to use some of the thoughts, the idol worshiping, etc., in the world around them. Now, there's some reasons for that, that they were weakened by that, because those gods made sense to a worldly person, or one that was looking to worship something in the world, because they represented things like rain, thunder, crops, cattle, fertility in cattle, fertility in humans, etc. Okay, and those were things that they could see in these gods, if you will, that the people around them were trying to worship. And sometimes we fall to that, okay, because we sometimes do the same thing, don't we? We exchange God as king for me as king instead. I think this is a lesson that we can get from Abimelech and from Israel at this stage. We, instead of treating God as king, we make ourselves as king. And how do we do that? Well, just simply by doing what we want to do, not what God wants us to do. Right? And we see that in these examples that we can look at. So in our culture, look around our culture today, 2024, what are some of the idols that we see around us today that we might be enticed by? Probably one of the biggest issues we have in the world, not just in the United States, but especially in the United States, is our wealth. Our wealth is a challenge. Our comfort is a challenge for us. We seek things that reinforce that comfort. We seek ways of living. The people we know, the places we work, the associations that we join, etc. Okay, right? We tend to live the culture of wealth. And I know that we hear that all the time. If you go to a country that does not have that, you get a little better feel for the difference between how they live and how we live. I haven't been to a lot of places to talk about, let's say, to try to teach them. I did go to Romania one time, and I still remember they had little to nothing. Okay? And we went to the villages. They were still getting water out of the ground. And so when you think about that, when we show up there, we look like kings to them in a way, because the wealth that we bring with us, both in what we say and what we do and the things we have with us, etc., they don't have. In many cases, they didn't have that. And so that, I think, is part of our challenge I see in our culture today. And sometimes we fall into the trap where we ought to actively cultivate something godly in culture like Abimelech could have. Instead, they kind of Christianize, if you will, the cultural things around us. We bring them into our fold. And you see that in the organizations that are saying they're churches today, but they are organizations, and we see them fighting in that way among themselves. Okay, Tola. Tola is how much is said about Tola? Well, I'm going to just go through a couple of these pretty quickly, because Tola has, just a verse or two that's available for him. After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola. So Tola was a judge. Abimelech was not a judge. Where he left them, they were worse than they were. Tola is a judge. First couple of verses here in chapter 10. So what tribe are they from? He was from Issachar. You don't talk a lot about Issachar, do you? We don't hardly ever talk about Issachar. But it was one of the tribes. The Hebrew meaning of Tola in the Bible was worm. It's not worm like we think, this creepy thing, crawling on the ground on your sidewalk after it rains. But it was this red worm that was kind of held in sort of awe, of some of the things that it would do. And so he was named after a worm. How long did Tola judge Israel? He judged them 23 years. He gets 2 verses, but he judges 23 years. So his lesson must have been pretty good. Okay, he must have not continued in the vein of Abimelech, right? And he saved them from that. Okay, and he lived in the Shamar, the hill country of Ephraim. And I want to kind of show something real quick on that. You can't really tell much there. I think this one's a little better. Okay, so here's Ephraim area. They said that there was a place, and I have a picture here, I believe, of this, that was called the Ephraim Trail or Route or something, and it was also referred to as, trying to remember what, the side of a mountain, when you're walking along this rim, okay? This rim route that came through Ephraim down to Jerusalem, and we see that he was in these mountains, in this mountainous area, and it seemed that most of his might have been more localized, although he is called a judge. So it's not as localized as we might think. But anyway, that's Tola, okay? Have you ever walked a rim? Go to Grand Canyon, walk the rim trail. It's pretty treacherous. Can get pretty treacherous. And that's what they said about that trail, going up and down. That was not a very easy way, not a very easy place to traverse back and forth. Then we come to Jair, verses 3 to 5 of 10. So he was from the tribe of Manasseh, okay? And we've seen where Manasseh is. You have one side of Manasseh is on the west side of Jordan, and there's one on the east side of Jordan, right? Part of Manasseh, okay, which was one of the sons of who? Whose son? Yeah, Joseph. Okay. What is the meaning of Jair? It's enlightener, or he who enlightens. Okay, so he was an interesting, I thought, judge. Okay, and he judged Israel 22 years. So between Tola, who got 2 verses, and Jair, who got 2 verses, okay, they have 55 years, 45 years, all right, 45 years between them, okay, in leading. That's pretty good, I'd say. They must have been pretty good leaders and led them in a proper way. He was from Gilead and buried in Canaan. How many children? All right, so this is one unique thing, we'll just say, is that he had a lot of children. Okay, so he had 30 sons and that rode on 30 donkeys, and he had 30 towns named after them. And so when you think about that if there's a little caution there, right? Because Jair wasn't always what you would call one of the people, man of the people. Okay, when you have 30 cities, okay, donkeys were sort of exceptional, if you will, in those days. Only those that were sort of from a kingly family had that wealth, prestige. He also had a lot of wives, okay, so on. So we don't get a lot more information about him. That's all we really get, but except the fact how long he judged. And that I do have to say was, I think, an important measurement. Okay, now we come to Jephthah, and we see that really this whole chapter of 10, and I'm going to quickly go through 10 and 11 here. So in 10, the trouble that comes up is the same as they've been having: Baal, Ashtoreth. The oppressors were Philistines, the Ammonites, and they oppressed them for 18 years. Now, that's a fairly long time, isn't it, that you are now subjected, if you will, to them. The people do eventually cry out to the Lord, and Jephthah becomes the judge, but not without a lot of drama, right? Because what's the drama around Jephthah, if you will? Who is how would I describe this? What was the rub between Jephthah and his family? Let's put it that way. Remember what the issue was between? Okay, he was not, and the rest of the family treated him like you would think they would in that case. They didn't think he should be part of the family. They didn't think he should be considered one of the children, especially one getting an inheritance, etc. And so verse 3 of chapter 11 says that he fled them, okay, fled the brothers, okay. So when we start getting into chapter 11, we see that he leads them, okay, and that he's willing to come back and do that. They go on their hands and knees, they beg him to come back and lead, because here's a statement they make, which is kind of astounding. Who will lead us against the Amorites? Okay. And so they basically ran him off, and then they realized, wait a minute, we don't really have anyone to lead us, okay, as a military leader against the Amorites. Okay. Jephthah is known as one of the valiant men, okay, strong, good leader, good fighter, okay? And so they convince him. He comes back, okay? He's going to lead them. So he negotiates something. He begins to negotiate with the Ammonites. And I believe this is a very interesting interaction between Jephthah and the Ammonites, because Jephthah sends a message to the Ammonites. And he says, basically asking them, why are you fighting us? Why have you come to do battle with us, right? And in verse 14, it says, Jephthah sends, that was the second time. The first time he sends them is verse 12, where he basically says, what do you have against us? Why are you coming to fight us? Then he goes down in verse 13, they say, because Israel on coming up from Egypt took away my land. Then Jephthah says, whoa, wait a minute. We didn't take any land from you. Okay. And says, when we tried to come through your land, you said no. So they went around the land. Okay, I know I'm going back to some of the things we've already studied, but you see him saying that, no, we went around, and so he sends that response back to the king of the Ammonites. 28 is the key of 11. The king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words of Jephthah. So no matter what Jephthah's argument was, he is not going to listen. What is the meaning of that? That means they're going to have a battle. Okay. Here's the key, if you will, for Jephthah. Verse 29, the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah. Okay. And so now we know that God is with him. And the Spirit has been engaged in each of these situations where the leader or the judge has divine help in what they get done. All right, so the last part is sort of one of the odd things, right, that we remember about Jephthah. In verses 30 and 31, Jephthah makes a rash vow, doesn't he? So Jephthah's kind of flush with victory, if you will, and he says, God, if you help us win, then I will offer whatever comes out to greet me from my household as a burnt offering. What a rash vow, right? And I think that there's books written about whether or not Jephthah fulfilled this fully. I'm not going to get into all of that, but here's what basically the Bible tells us, is that he fulfilled his vow to God. So whatever that turned out to be, we know that God did not. He considered an abomination to offer a person to him. Okay, he considered it an abomination to offer your child to Chemosh, to Baal, and to Moloch, and so it's difficult. It's a difficult situation to get your head fully around, because that's what Jephthah said he was going to do. So who comes out to greet him? His daughter. So he makes this rash vow, and now he has to fulfill it. There are those who, I think, maybe to make it easier to get our head around, okay, try to say that there's more than one way to offer someone to God. We know that that is in fact what happens to Samuel, right? But we can't really know. Okay, I'm just going to say I don't know. If you have detailed information on that, I would be more than willing to talk about that. But I think that some commentators, if you look at Adam Clark's version, okay, I don't know if you know Adam Clark, but he's one of the very old commentators, but it does get updated. But he says, they think the best translation would be, I will consecrate it to the Lord. Okay, so I think that's where we would like to take it, right? All right, let's go on from there. If you want to talk about that more, we can. But Ibsen was the next one. Okay, we don't know where he was from. His name means splendid, illustrious. Okay, so that's a pretty good name, He judged Israel for 7 years. His predecessor was Jephthah, and successor was Elon. And so we will now go to Elon. Chapter 12. So Elon was a Jebusite, and he judged Israel for 10 years from Zebulun. His name means oak tree, mighty or strong. That's a great name. That's a good name to have. Something that means strong. He was the judge for 10 years. Okay. Abdon was another one of the minor. They call him the minor judges, if you will. He was from Ephraim also. His name means servitude. And how long did he judge? It was 8 years. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 young donkeys. So once again, what did we say that represented? Wealth, right? Wealth. And so it was really a way to demonstrate your wealth. So, he was a judge, and he judged for a number of years. And so he had some weaknesses, I think, too. Okay, Samson. All right, so you've been waiting to get to this, haven't you? Waiting to get to Samson? All right, so Samson. Baal, Ashtaroth, same thing. Other gods are now also being worshipped, but these are who? The Philistines. Those Philistines. They're going to be, a thorn in their side for a long time, okay? So Israel cries out, God sends and raises Samson. And there is some uniqueness to Samson, and because what is one thing that's unique about Samson versus all the other judges? From birth on, right? We see him from birth until he was a judge is represented in his account here. And so it's interesting because, and this is just a short outline, we're going to go into a couple more things, but the angel of the Lord announces his birth, okay, to Manoah's wife. The angel of the Lord announces the birth to Manoah then, okay, his wife, then to Manoah. Trouble begins in 14, right? Samson seeks a Philistine wife. It's pretty much downhill. There are some other things that are an issue before then, and then we have the feast and the riddle, which is really the one great issue that raises up the angst between Samson and the Philistines. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of those a little bit. So the birth narrative, okay, much of chapter 13 is devoted to it. There's only really 2 sentences about his childhood, and even so it is the only birth narrative we have in Judges. We don't see what happens to where the other judges are from. Okay. The account of Jesus' birth follows a similar thing, right? It's a long narrative, is in Matthew and Luke, and then a short childhood. Okay. So we see the birth, to talk about the birth, things happening around the birth, and but we don't know much about his. There's like 6 or 7 verses about his, childhood. I'm going to finish this screen and then we're done. Sometimes God plans the deliverance of his people far in advance, and I think this is, to me, one of the interesting situations in 1 Peter 1:20, and I'm folding up there while I'm talking, okay? Stretching it out a little. So in 1 Peter 1:20, we see God chose him, Jesus, as your ransom long before the world began. So we see that God chooses how he's going to deliver long before that being even exists in this world. Okay, we're going to finish that off next week. Thank you.